Hey guys, excuse me. Welcome to another installment of Inner Alchemy. We've been away for our winter break, and as many of you know, I ended up in the hospital with a bacterial infection that kept me away 1 week longer than we originally planned. Today, we've got a really controversial and I hope interesting installment for you. Today, we're going to talk about Stregheria and whether that really is Italian witchcraft. Now, I know a lot of people are going to get their horns twisted by this one, but we welcome you to participate and comment and ask questions in our broadcast when we come back. Alchemy. And welcome back. This is your host for Inner Alchemy, Dr. John Michael Salvato. We're glad that you're here. And as I said, I'm just getting over being in the hospital with a bacterial infection, so my voice is a little bit weak and a little raspy. So thanks for being willing to put up with that. And today we're going to talk about something that I really kind of put off because I just felt like it really wasn't worth my breath. And that is some of the comments that have appeared on Amazon concerning my book, Magic at the Crossroads. And yes, this is a shameless plug for the book itself, which is, let's see if I can get that in there without Magic at the Crossroads, Italian Folk Magic and the Old Religion. Now, a lot of the comments that you guys have offered after reading the book have been very positive and very supportive and really appreciative of the material that I present there. But there were a couple comments, maybe 3 or 4 comments from folks who read the book, one of whom we understand is mentally ill and somebody who's quite mentally disturbed and has not been able to move beyond their own irresponsibility being the cause of having to put their dog down. And so that person is a hot mess. But the other 2 people or 3 people that commented negatively appear to either have not really read the book fully or not read the book with an open mind. And so today I want to kind of dispel some of those thoughts. The kind of the common theme there is that folks were saying that they found the book to be too autobiographical or to be too much about my personal gnosis. They also felt overwhelmingly that I was attacking people like Raven Grimassi and Lori Bruno, neither of whom I would ever attack, but both of whose work I do address in the course of the book. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the questions that surround this idea of whether Stregheria is authentically Italian witchcraft. And so in the simplest of terms, I want to say right up front that the premise of the book itself and my belief is no. The answer is absolutely not. Stregheria has nothing to do with Italian witchcraft. So take a deep breath. And if you're feeling the need to push back, feel free to jump in the comments. I'm more than happy to engage you, but please hear me out. So first of all, we need to understand that within the whole of Italy and those Italian Americans whose family were first generation, immigrants to the United States, the word stregheria has never, to my knowledge, in the 50 years that I've been practicing Italian folk magic, I never heard the word stregheria until I read Raven Grimassi's book. Now, that said, I want to be really clear that in my book, one of the things that happened, and for those who've read the book and maybe got a little confused, I noticed by going back through the book myself last night that one of the things the editors did was they changed all of the times that I refer to Stregheria with a small s, lowercase s, to capital S. And there was a distinction that I meant to be implied in the book. Language itself is dynamic. Language itself is living. And that's why while I know that some of my dear friends and even some new friends have expressed disdain for the fact that I spell magic with a K, because that seems to be something that arose from, and did in fact arise from, the neo-pagan Gardnerian tradition and Wicca and all of that that sort of neo-pagan attempts to turn witchcraft into a religion. When I use magic with a K, I use it in a distinctive term, really kind of in a snarky way, to take back some of what the Gardnerians and the Wiccans and the Alexandrians mean when they use that term, and they throw that term around, I think, a little bit too freely. So when I use magic and I spell magic with a K, I mean the kind of magic that is animistic, that is folk magic, that is what I consider to be the purest and most ancient forms of magic, and compared to ritual magic and the drama and theatrics of magic that occur in those organizations that have attempted to turn witchcraft into a religion. So I will start by saying that I have absolutely no problem with those who've chosen to create a religion in the 20th century that incorporates elements of witchcraft. I have no problems with Wicca. I have no problems with Alexandrian magic. I have no problems with Stregheria. In fact, I have some very close friends who are students of Raven Grimassi, and some who are students of Laurie Bruno. And I think both of those individuals contributed a great deal toward creating an Italian-American version of Wicca. But let's be really clear, that's what it is. So what we need to do now is take a step back and say, well, what is Wicca? Wicca is not witchcraft. And the problem, again, with language is that in the early days, in the Old English, Wicca was just a word that was used to refer to witches. But Wicca with a capital W is not the same thing as it was referred to in the old days. Wicca is the 20th century neo-pagan creation of Gerald Gardner and his colleagues. And as the 20th century versions of neo-paganism arose, they took a misrepresentation or a misinterpretation by some of the world's great folklorists, such as Charles Leland. And Charles Leland misinterpreted what he witnessed in Tuscany. And as a result of that misinterpretation, they created a religion around something that was never a religion. I can tell you, as a hereditary witch, that witchcraft in my family, through generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years, depending on how much of the mythos you choose to take as being literal, was never a religion. Witchcraft is a practice. It's a path. It's the crooked path of the wise. And there was never any religious inculcations involved. So when Charles Leland saw the practice, the religion, the church, if you will, for lack of a better term, of Diana, or both Diana and Dianus, and heard the mythos of Aradia, then what he interpreted was that because there were some witches in that sect, in that church, in that coven, what we call in Italian a boschetto, that must mean that was the religion of the witches. And that's not the case. And so in my book, I talk about the fact that there is a distinction, there is a difference between the old way, which is witchcraft, and the old religion. Now, some families like my own had groups within the family that continued to practice that old religion. They were still devoted to Diana and Dianus. They followed a lot of those old customs. Some of the people in our family were sort of the equivalent in the Italian tradition of what we have in the Santeria tradition in the Afro-Caribbean nations. And that is that they sort of did a syncretization between Catholic saints and the old religion. And so we would have, representations of Our Lady Star of the Sea as Diana, We would have, other representations of different saints who represented different aspects of the old religion. And so within the context of our tradition as Italians, there was what we call the Benedicaria. And the Benedicaria were, in the simplest of terms, were practitioners of the old religion who practiced their religion under the veneer of Catholicism. Now, some of those practitioners of Benedicaria also practiced the old ways. They also practiced witchcraft or stregoneria. Now, again, we don't get the opportunity to change the historical fact or the anthropological record. And so within Italy itself, if you were to use the word stregoneria, that has a pejorative sense, a pejorative connotation to it when referring to witchcraft. It's looking down one's nose at witchcraft. But maybe in day-to-day life, in my own personal growing up, we might have referred quietly to somebody who practiced the craft as a fattucchiero, or as someone who practiced fallu santucci. We didn't really say stregoneria unless it was somebody that you thought was was casting the maloicchio on people, and you would say that they were a strega. Now, in the 21st century, I've chosen to reclaim those terms, much as I've reclaimed the term faggot or queer when describing myself as a gay man. So I take those terms and choose to make them a positive connotation toward my practice of the craft. But we can't change, just because we do that doesn't mean that the historic record changes. And so there was never a time in my growing up when our practice of the craft was equated with, or even more than tangentially connected to the old religion. And so in my book, I refer to the practice of the craft as stregoneria. I refer to the old religion as stregheria with a small s, even though it wasn't really called that. It was the cult of Diana. Now, I want you to think for a moment. Let's say you walk into an Episcopal church, and you've never been in an Episcopal church in your life before. You've never seen one. You don't understand anything about it. And in that Episcopal church, you see a group of nuns. You see a priest standing at the altar. Maybe you see a bishop. And then you see a bunch of other people. And those other people are wearing everyday clothes, so you're really not sure. But you also notice up at the altar, there might be some altar servers who are wearing something that's kind of similar to what you're seeing the priest wear, or something similar to what you're seeing the nuns wear. Now, it would be wrong for you to assume that everybody in that Episcopal church is a priest or a nun. It would be wrong because that's not the truth. Within that congregation, there are bakers and accountants, there are teachers, there are lay people who don't work, there are retired folks, there are children. Now, it's true that within the Episcopal Church, there are some priests. It's true that there are some nuns, but not everybody who's there is a priest or a nun. And not everybody who's at the altar is a priest or a nun. Some of them might be altar servers. Some of them might be lay readers. Some of them might be members of the congregation who are just helping out. Well, in my opinion, that is what Charles Leland experienced when he saw what happens in a boschetto, in the grove of Diana. He saw that there were some witches, certainly, who were involved in that tradition. And why are there witches in that tradition? Well, because the mythos, the legend, is that Diana and her brother Dianus, or Lucifer, gave birth to Aradia, the first or mother of witches. And so there's a connection there to that ancient story, to that ancient mythos. But that's where the connection begins and ends. And so fast forward to the 20th century, Gerald Gardner created a religion called Wicca that was based on that misinterpretation, thinking that everybody who was in the cult of Diana was a witch. And so as a result, hey, Lee, we have the 20th century neo-pagan and Reconstructionist movement. Now, there is nothing wrong with that. And part of that reconstructionist movement includes people like Raven Grimassi. Now, I'll make absolutely no bones about the fact that I find that some of the claims that Raven Grimassi has made in some of his books to be overtly fanciful, baseless, and strictly fictional tales. There's some of the connections that he claims to be there were not there. Yes, there were those who followed the cult of Tana and Tanus. There were those who followed the cult of Jana and Janus, and those who followed the cult of Fauna and Faunus. But to say that there were three sects, the Tanara and the Janara and the Fanara, is not necessarily based on historic record. But what Raven created was a beautiful religion. And for those who are attracted to religion, it's as good as any other. But be clear, Stregheria is an American religion, period. It's a 20th century American religion. So just as the Mormon Church is an American religion, just as the Jehovah's Witnesses are an American religion, Stregheria is an American religion. It is not Italian witchcraft. Now, when I refer to Italian witchcraft in my videos, I talk about stregoneria. But again, it's important to understand that that's not a term that would have been used in the old ways. It was an ancient and unnamed path that my ancestors followed. And there was no need to have to call it anything. It was just part of our daily lifestyle. See, that's what folk magic is. It's a part of the culture. It's a part of the living of life. And some of the people who practiced our folk magic, our tradition, may have been involved with the old religion. Now, as I grew up, when I was 16 years old, I was asked to step into a role within the cult of Diana, and I did. But for me personally, and this is something that will piss off a lot of my relatives and ancestors when I say this, and it might be the first time that I've actually said it publicly, outside of workshops and things, but first time I'm saying it on video, I have absolutely no use for religion. I stepped into that role as a Catholic priest who understood that the reason I was entering into the priesthood was to be able to protect those followers and practitioners of the old religion, to provide them sort of a shelter and a barrier so that they could practice under the veneer of Catholicism and still learn the lessons of that tradition. That had nothing to do with witchcraft. And so for me, it was something that just made me bristle, because rather than people using the cult of Diana or any other religion as a means of personal empowerment, it became a crutch. It became one of these things where everybody was so focused and obsessed about making the right offering to the right goddess at the right time, and they couldn't do this working if they didn't do this and they didn't do that. And all I saw was bullshit and manipulation. All I saw was an attempt for people's egos to rise as they became the leaders of those organizations. And so I wrote a book and talked about that. And I made every effort to talk about that in a kind and gentle and compassionate way, not disrespecting Raven Grimassi or Lori Bruno by any means. And for those of my friends who practice Stregheria, I honor and celebrate the fact that they found a religious path that works for them. I haven't got a religious path because religion itself is of no value to me personally. And my practice of witchcraft doesn't rely on religion. It doesn't rely on worshiping gods or goddesses. It doesn't rely on having to worry about making the right offering. Otherwise, my magic isn't going to work, because magic doesn't work that way. At the end of the day, the practice of the craft for me is part of my lifestyle, and it's a personal empowerment path. And so when I wrote the book as and say very clearly multiple times in the book that this is my journey. This is my story. Yes, as someone said critically, this is about my personal gnosis, because in the Italian folk magic tradition, there is no grand poobah. There is no doctrine or dogma for us to build our entire practice upon. It is about personal gnosis. It is about you cultivating your craft, learning from the ancestors, learning from your family members what the different herbs and plants are, working with the spirits of those plants and herbs, so that we can actually be more successful in living in harmony with the whole of the cosmos. But it's not about religion. And at least it's not about religion for me. And so when folks criticize and they say, oh, he had to bring politics in. Yes, I had to bring politics in because this is my life, my experience, my personal reclamation of my power that I have been, a journey I've been on from the time I was 6 years old. And that includes responding to what's going on in the world around me. That includes protecting myself and my family and my loved ones and my tribe. So when I wrote the book, I didn't write the book in an attempt to discredit Raven Grimassi, nor did I write the book in an attempt to discredit anyone else that practices. And every sincere and genuine practitioner that I've ever met over the last 50 years has done things a little bit differently. And I think that's really what this is about, is learning to find your path and not about being right and somebody else being wrong. So on the outside, yes, it looks like there was some animus there. And I'm sure at some point in time, when I first started to read Raven's books, I was a little bit tweaked and pissed off at what I was reading because I felt that it was duplicitous. But I had a conversation with him. See, that isn't something I'm going to air in my book because it serves no purpose. I've already had the conversation with him. And I had the opportunity to say, look, I think there are some things we are never going to see eye to eye about. I think there are some things we are going to agree wholly on. But we don't get to change history. We don't get to pretend that something that was created in the 20th century has ancient roots. And if you read my book, you notice that I share the stories as they were handed down to me, and I try to be very respectful of those stories. Now, I'm personally a skeptic. I'm personally somebody who needs to see real evidence. I'm a medical professional, and so for me to look at something that said, oh, well, this is what, I'll give you a good example. There's a story that was passed down in our family about how our family ended up in Pompeii, and until shortly before Vesuvius erupted in 79 in the Common Era, that we had somehow moved toward Monte Corvino. Now, I always accepted that as being a little bit of a fantasy story, a fairy tale, until somebody recently, a very well-known genealogist who's working on finding some of the connections in our family to Poggioreale, and I saw some evidence of the fact that yes, we did actually end up in Pompeii, and then we did migrate to Monte Corvino, and then from there came to the United States, generations later in the 20s or just before the 20s. And so I'm the kind of person who just takes things like that, takes the stories that we're told with a grain of salt. And I personally recommend that everybody take those stories with a grain of salt because that's what they are. When my family tells me that our story begins 2,400 years ago, I understand that that's the legend, that's the myth. I also understand that the people who are telling me these stories never went to high school. And so they're repeating the stories that they heard. They're probably embellishing them a little bit. And so none of us really knows where the truth in that origin story lies. And so when I share the story in my book, I tell you, this is the story, this is the legend. The only things I can tell you is that, yes, I agreed as a teenager to go into the seminary at 16. I agreed to become the priest that would serve our boschetto, our ground boschetto. And that for me, the boschetto was not, it didn't resonate with who I was. I was happy to provide that service. I was happy to do what I could to try to protect the family members who practiced a religion that was persecuted, especially persecuted in the old country. But really and truly, I felt like the best way I could be of service was to say, guys, we can look at what Teresa of Avila said, and she said that the church is like a beautiful boat that takes us to the other shore, to the shore of awakening, the shore of awareness. And once it gets us there, we should burn the shit out of that boat. And that's what I think all religion is. It can be a vessel that takes us from here to a shore of greater realization. But once we get there, burn that shit to the ground, because it no longer serves any purpose. And I recognize that that's my journey. I'm not telling anybody else that they should abandon their religion. And if you practice Stregheria, good for you. But it doesn't work for me. But if you're going to practice a neo-pagan religion, if you're going to call yourself a pagan, and let's be really clear, there are no pagans in the 21st century. There are neo-pagans. And I don't consider myself to be pagan. But if you're going to call yourself that, then own the fact that the religions, that the practices that you engage in today were developed in the 19th and 20th century, period. They don't have roots in the ancient world. We can't be sure what those roots in the ancient world would have even looked like. My book talks about the fact that I think that Charles Leland completely misinterpreted what he saw, and that as a result, Madeline Murray as well did the same thing. I personally have questions about the Maddalena, who supposedly transmitted the Vangelo, the Gospel of Hereditary, to Charles Leland. I question all of that. It's beautiful mythology. It's a nice story. But is it really ancient? Because I know this. I know that within our family, those who practice the cult of the worship of the cult of Diana would never tell you what happened inside the boschetto, ever. We wouldn't talk about it, especially to an American who came there from Philadelphia. So I have to take with a grain of salt the story that Charles Leland told. And unfortunately, Gerald Gardner, I think, was motivated by an agenda all his own, as most of us are. And so Gerald Gardner then created his religion. And if we wanted to, we could sit and pick apart every single one of these neo-pagan religions, and I could tell you all day long why I'm not part of any of those. But what value would that have to somebody else who's on the path? There was nobody, just because I was born into a hereditary tradition, didn't mean I had it easier. It meant I had to find out, just like every single one of you that are watching this, what works for me. My grandmother may have taught me the ritual of the Maloikyo on Christmas Eve, but I had to reach the point where I could say, this prayer that they're saying is to San Sisto, who really I have no connection or affinity for. But maybe it's the energetic work that I'm doing, and chanting that particular prayer brings me into that space, into that awareness, into that energetic vibration that allows me to remove the Maloikyo. So for me, the old stories, the traditions, even the old chants and spells themselves are just doorways that bring us to that place of presence and awareness. And so I never meant to hurt anyone's feelings with my book. I never meant to attack anyone in my book. I hope someday that I get a chance to meet Lori Bruno, because I think we'll have a delightful conversation. We may not agree on a lot of things. I have a sense that we might agree on more than what I think we will, because I understand that anyone who really and truly cares about helping other people is going to have that common ground that my grandmother had, that my Tia Maria had, that all of the cousins and aunts and uncles who supported me and brought me to this point. And that's the only reason that I do these broadcasts. So yeah, for the folks who read my book and dislike it, first of all, I'll tell you, after rereading my own book last night, there were things about my book that I disliked, because I caught things that the editor changed that might have seemed really subtle to them, but change a lot of the idea. So when, for example, I say in the book that I practice Stregheria, I didn't practice Raven Grimasi's, thing, and never would, because for me personally, it's absurd, and has no basis in reality. But when I said Stregheria, I gave a definition early on in the book and said, so this is the old religion, and yeah, for a time I practiced that. I did what I could to be part of my family's culture, but I realized that that was not my tribe, and so religion has no part of my practice and no part in my life. For me, the practice of the craft is something that every breath that I take is part of that process, and there's no need for religion there. Now, does that mean that I don't find some nostalgia and some centering value in having a statue of Hecate, or having a statue of Tanus, or doing some of the old rituals the way that I was taught, the way that my grandmother did it, the way that my aunt did it? Yeah, I love those things, but I recognize when I'm doing them that it's really only about bringing me into that space, that it's about stilling and quieting the mind. It's about mindfulness practice, and really becoming more aware of the potential that exists in each and every one of us to live in greater harmony with the energies of the cosmos. And when we live in that greater harmony, then that allows us to work not just on the noumenal level, that not just to be able to work in a metaphysical sense, but it allows us to truly become masters of the 7 principles of alchemy, of the Hermetic principles. It allows us to become masters of healing. It allows us to serve humankind in a way that benefits the 6 dimensions of wellness, as we talk about in my other program. And so for me, that's what this is all about. And if you read my book and you found that the book was too much about personal gnosis, I'm really sorry. I do believe that Amazon has a very liberal return policy. If you hated the book, send it back. I've given out 7,000 copies of my book compared to selling maybe 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 copies. So it's not about money for me. I didn't write this book to make a buck. If I wanted to write the book to make a buck, I would have written about something that was going to be popular with everybody. I understood that the ideas I was putting forth were going to result in my getting shunned a little bit by some of the people that I love most dearly. I mean, there are some of my friends who write for a very popular publishing company that keeps its authors on a very short leash. And there are others who write for a very popular blogging platform that keep its authors on an even shorter leash. And while those people genuinely, I believe, still like me, still love me, still care about me, publicly, they're very careful what they support and showing any connection to me. And that's okay. That's on them. I understood that when I stepped out and made a statement and said, I'm sorry, I think most of what Raven Grimasi claims is bullshit, that it was going to step on the toes of those who love Raven Grimasi. And may his memory be honored, and may his memory be blessed. My intention was not to hurt or step on anyone's toes, but I personally had a relationship with Dr. Leo Martello. And so when somebody makes a claim about Leo and says that Leo practiced Stregheria, I bristle. It gives me agita, because it's not true. Because Leo was one of the most formative and gentle and kind and wise teachers that I had as a young adult, as a teenager. He helped me to find my voice as a young gay man and helped me to find my voice as a young gay witch. And he never practiced Stregheria, period. So, guys, I wanted to get this out here because I want to be done with it. Some people are going to like the book. Some people aren't going to like the book. Who cares? It's not my business. I wrote the book. I did my part. I shared what I think. I shared my story. To those who say it's absolutely ridiculous to imagine that the stories of apostolic succession are true that I document at the end of the book. Yeah, I agree. It is absurd to believe any of that stuff as being literally or historically intact when there's not a perfect historic record. And I don't believe we need to buy into any of that shit. I do believe that there's something we each need to do, though, and that is in anything that we're doing, in every working that we're doing. If you want to take a ritual bath and be cleansed and do all that, cast a circle and sage the room and all that other shit, if that helps you become centered, great. But don't criticize somebody who doesn't. Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is return to the present moment. That present moment, that's where love is. That's where the 0 point energy is, or the source, or whatever you want to call it. If you need to anthropomorphize your power and call it a god or a goddess, then go for it. But know that the only place you're going to meet that god or goddess is in the present moment. You can't meet them in the past. You'll never meet them in the future. And so when you come to the present moment, you root yourself in the source of your own power by whatever name you choose to give it. And you fill that present moment with awareness. You fill that present moment with gratitude. You fill that present moment with compassion. And from there, my friends, you're able to create the world that you've always dreamed of. You're able to create the healing that you've really desired. And you're able to create the clarity that lets you know all of this is so fucking unimportant. It's your path. Follow it. Don't worry about anybody else's. And always remember, the best is yet to come. We'll talk to you soon. I love and appreciate each and every one of you. Mary Grace, thanks for tuning in, and Kate and Lee and everyone who's watching on the replay. I hope this has been helpful for those of you that were a little bit confused by the book. I apologize. I don't know that I want to write another book about the difference between stregoneria and stregheria. I think this is an issue that's been put to sleep, and best that it should be. So stay well, and I'll talk to you soon.